Tonight, as I said, it's April 3rd, and it is a special day in my world. It is the 6-year anniversary of the passing over to the other side of my friend and mentor and teacher, Terence McKenna, one of the most remarkable individuals I've ever experienced. And tonight, his brother, his younger brother, as a matter of fact, a remarkable individual in his own right, Dr. Dennis McKenna, will be on the program, a much anticipated appearance, which myself and many listeners have been looking forward to for a long time. And if that weren't enough, we've also got Stephen Herod Buhner. And Stephen's been on the program before as well. He's the author of a number of amazing books. The Lost Language of Plants, of course, one that is my favorite, but he's written a number of things. So Dennis McKenna and Stephen Herod Buhner tonight together, and we'll have that for you in about an hour or so. Stephen is also an herbalist, an amazing herbalist. He's an ecologist. As I said, he's the author of The Lost Language of Plants, this amazing book. Most of you are familiar with Dennis and what he's done over the years. So you're in for a treat tonight. All right? And it is a special day. And let me tell you something else, all right? Last night was a special night. More about that another time. But suffice to say this, all right? And I hope you're listening. And this is to everybody out there within the sound of my voice. Last night something was born. And last night something was planted. And it was good. And I'm tired. All right, this is another song from Journey Through the Spheres. This one is called Earth Spirit. Check this out.
It's not, as Milton said, the God who hung the stars like lamps in heaven, but it's the God of the oceans and the jungles and the ice caps and the rivers and the glaciers and the great schools of fish and the deserts. And it's the goddess of the earth. It's the mind of organic life on this planet. great news that all shamanism can attest to and is built on is the news that there is a sentient, minded, caring entity that surrounds and holds the planet in its hands, in its heart. Call it Gaia, call it God, call it the spirit of nature. It doesn't matter what you call it. It transcends the rational apprehension of higher primates.
All right, this is Mike, and you're listening to RadiOrbit. My first guest is an author, a deep ecologist. He's a poet, a master brewer of beer. He's a gentleman who is as comfortable discussing the works of Goethe as he is discussing Lyme disease. He's a brilliant herbalist. He's an artist, and his name is Stephen Herod Buhner. He's been on the program once before, and we welcome him back. My second guest, also returning to the program, is a world-renowned ethnopharmacologist. He's a brilliant biochemist and neurochemist. He's the author of amazing books and innumerable professional publications. And he is, in my opinion, a shaman of the highest order. He is just back from Peru. His name is Dr. Dennis McKenna. It is the day after St. Patrick's Day, and I would consider myself extremely fortunate to have the opportunity to talk to either of these gentlemen alone, but the luck of the Irish is with us today, and we are fortunate enough to have them both together to share their thoughts and experiences with us, and it is a true privilege and a gift. So from my heart, both of you guys, Dennis and Stephen, thanks so much for being back on the program, and welcome.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's good to be here again.
Wonderful. All right. Well, these three-way conversations are a little bit tricky sometimes, so at least as we get going here to begin with, I'm just going to ask both of you right off the bat, what's been up lately? Stephen, we haven't spoken for about a year. Dennis, same with you. I know you've both been very busy in the meantime. So Stephen, maybe you first. Why don't you give us a little update about what's going on in your world?
Well, a couple of things that, in just terms of my own research and stuff I've been working on that's been fun for me. I've been really interested in emerging diseases for a long time because, you know, they're kind of freaky and I think they're really interesting. And I like really watching how emerging diseases move through human populations and how plant populations begin to follow those along. So that's one of the things I've been working on. And the second one is I've become really intrigued by how different ego states, like in the developmental stages that human beings have, like the 9-month-old infant or the 2-year-old or the 4-year-old, that each of those developmental stages there's a particular ego state that goes along with them. And then learning how to cathect or put energy into one of those ego states and let it kind of come forward so that you see the world through that part. Each one of those developmental stages has particular gifts and strengths, and certain perceptual strengths and uniquenesses to it. And so I'm working a lot with correlating that to a lot of work in other mystical traditions and indigenous cultures, and just the way perception of plant communications, for instance, is facilitated by particular ego states more than others.
Wow, fascinating. I'm living it in real time. I have a 2-year-old son.
No, that's a great way to learn about that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm learning about the ego development and all that. Trust me, it's very interesting and very enlightening, as a matter of fact. So, Dennis, how about you? What's the latest? I know you're recently just back from Peru.
Yes. Yes, I've been away in Peru for 5 weeks, and I just got back about a week ago. And what I'm doing down there, I actually don't know if we discussed it previously on the program, but I have a grant from a private foundation to investigate Amazonian traditional medicines, potentially for new compounds to treat schizophrenia. And so, this is really classic ethnopharmacology in the sense that it combines looking at literature, looking at what's known about some of these plants with interviews with traditional healers, and trying to tie together a number of threads to identify plants that are not so well known in terms of their chemistry, but have a pretty good folk record of being used to treat these kinds of things. And so through that process, we've identified about 250 species that we're trying to get our hands on. And so far, we've gotten about half that number. So we're not really expecting to get all of them. So I was down there basically on the second phase of this project, and did some more collecting. Interestingly, when you go down to South America to do this type of field work, you find that you spend as much time as in government offices trying to get permits and get the bureaucracy under control as you do in the jungle. And so, we've been trying to be very sort of straightforward and honest about all these intellectual property issues and trying to export these things, and that's a process that's been going on for the last couple of years. Finally, this time, we seem to have worn them down, basically. So they finally decided to release all the specimens that we've had in storage for a couple of years. So I'm very happy. We've got 2 big boxes of collections on the way. If they're not intercepted in some way, we'll have a lot to sort out in the lab in about a week or so when they get here. So that's what I've been doing, hanging out in the jungle a lot.
Big news, though. That's great news that they released your samples, your specimens.
Yeah, it is.
All right, well, good.
It's very frustrating.
I imagine, but it sounds like you had 125, even though maybe it was half of what you were looking to collect. It seems, at least to me, it seems like a lot. It seems wonderful, because knowing the power of some of these things, if you have 125 of them, maybe there's 125 miracles there or something.
Well, I doubt that, but we've settled for one.
That's right.
Out of the pool, if we come up with just one new compound that looks interesting, I think we'll be happy.
All right. Well, Stephen, this relates directly to your work, of course, as well, because Stephen comes from a long line of healers, and of course, his interest in emerging diseases and the things that he brings up originally certainly must be related to this work. What do you guys think about the connections between Dennis's work and Stephen, your work in emerging diseases and trying to come up with solutions for some of these things?
Well, it's interesting. Dennis actually, his first book that he wrote with Terrence, The Invisible Landscape. I got a copy of that back in 1979, and when I was working on my degree in transcultural epistemology, and basically looking at the shaman as an archetype for human contact with the sacred. And I wrote him a letter, and he was really nice. He wrote me back this long letter, and so it's kind of neat to be able to talk with him today.
That was an era when we had time to write long letters.
Exactly. We were both just babies back then.
Right.
Well, it's funny, you guys, because I told Dennis off the air that it's sort of the closing of a circle, because I was familiar with Dennis's material as well, and had read Invisible Landscape and lots of other things that he had done and things that Terrence had done. But not until I had spoken to Dennis last year was I familiar with you, Stephen. He introduced me to you and told me that he thought that you were doing wonderful work, and that's when I went out and got The Lost Language of Plants, which was a stunner to me, and then went on to read The Secret Teachings of Plants, and then got in touch with you, and then we talked. So it's wonderful to have,
that's
to
great.
have you guys
That's
together.
Really fun.
Yes, the work of Stevens that I'm familiar with mostly is The Lost Language of Plants, which I think is a wonderful book, and in a way, it's the book that I wanted to write for a long time. He very beautifully explains the way that, you know, these ecological systems involving plants and everything else in the ecosystem are so carefully regulated by plant chemistry. And, you know, that's a message that people sort of overlook or are not really aware of. You know, the question in classes I teach come up, you know, why do plants make all of this chemistry? Why do you find this chemical diversity in nature? And the answer is that, you know, they don't just spin these things off for the fun of it. They have important roles in regulating the ecosystem, and you know, Stephen explains that very beautifully and very poetically, and I really appreciate his contribution in that book. It's required reading in all my classes.
Great, thanks, Dennis.
And yeah, Stephen, maybe you can riff on that for a minute, because I think it's something that does deserve more discussion and clarification, and we can always make it more clear of this deep connection. Dennis, you once told me, I think, that plants substitute, I think you called it biosynthesis for behavior.
Right. Plants substitute biosynthesis for behavior.
And Stephen, what do you make of that sort of a statement?
Well, I mean, plants are really intriguing, and I suppose, you know, one of the things that strikes me the most as I age, I'm 53 now, and Dennis, you're 55, I guess, and is how incredibly stupid I've been so much of my life, or ignorant might be a better word. But, you know, I mean, it's just like I still get caught up in realizing how anthropocentric I am. I mean,
right.
You know, it's like I remember walking along, and then the first time I was shocked at the realization that plants have been making these kind of chemicals for millions of years, and we're, you know, for like 170 million years, some of them, and we're, you know, I'm like, gee, I wonder what those medicines did before we showed up. Isn't that amazing, you know?
Right,
you know,
that's the question.
You know, and then, you know, one of the things that is just really fascinating to me, for instance, like pine pollen is extremely high in testosterone.
Really?
It's the exact same chemical that's in our bodies, and then pines have been around for, you know, hundreds of millions of years, a long time. But we've got this whole thing about human men and testosterone, but, you know, that's been out there for a long time, and that plants make neurochemicals, and they've been making them a lot longer than we've been using them in our brains. And slowly what I have started to understand very deeply as I re-inhabit my inner being with the world, as John Seed calls it, is that we're only a specific instance of a macrocosmic kind of phenomenon, that everything has intelligence. I mean, you think about it, every organism has to identify things that are coming into its system that touch it, and they have to identify what it is and how to use it and how to respond to it. And so, you know, just like Pythagoras said all those years ago, he says, everything's intelligent.
Right.
And so we kind of come out of this ecological environmental soup. We were expressed for an ecological reason, and of course, all of these things that have been going on all along have impacts on us. I mean, we're made up of the same substance. So as I become more and more immersed in the world, and I start to see myself as just a localized expression of a general phenomenon, that kind of anthropocentrism disappears, and also at the same time I can see I mean, Dennis has got a long-standing interest in schizophrenia, and I do as well, and I worked at it more as a psychotherapist from that angle of it, and then working with deep relationship with people with the earth and helping resolve schizophrenic structures through that. But seeing how all of this stuff is interrelated, I mean, it's really interesting. To me, I look at schizophrenia as an ecological expression more than anything else.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's right. There are many things that Stephen brought up that, that spark comment and they could be talked about. But I think, the point that he makes that, we're all made of the same stuff. Plants, animals, everything in the environment. On the chemical level, we're all made of the same stuff. And the fact that plants have neurochemicals in them is, in some ways, remarkable, but in other ways, is to be expected. But, plants, I mean, this notion that plants mediate their relationships to the environment through biosynthesis rather than behavior, is an expression of that. Plants, these molecules, this chemical diversity that you find in the plant kingdom is really, these things are messengers. This is how they communicate. I think this is one reason why in graduate school you get a disproportionate number of people study zoology and relatively few people study botany. Because, there's a widespread perception that plants don't do anything.
Yeah, there is.
They just sort of sit there.
They sit there. I mean, Larry Niven's favorite statement, how much intelligence does it take to sneak up on a carrot?
Yeah, right.
Vegetarians are really dumb. Carnivores have to be really smart.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but animals mediate their, animals behave and plants biosynthesize, but on the surface they don't seem to be doing that much. But inside, there's a lot going on the chemical level, and because of photosynthesis, which is the trick that plants have mastered that nothing else has, they're able to do that. As Stephen points out so well in his chapter on this in his book, All Plants Are Chemists. It's a great chapter. And, another point I like to make to my ethnopharmacology class is this notion that, the very neurotransmitters that, are in our brain that mediate what we think of as the higher functions, cognition and symbol forming capacity, and this kind of thing. I mean, they're basically the monoamine neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and so on. Mm-hmm. Those things come from what we call the essential amino acids, and the reason they're called essential amino acids is you have to get them from your diet. So, in other words, you have to consume plants. We cannot synthesize these essential amino acids, which are the precursors for these neurotransmitters. We have to get them from dietary sources, and that's either from eating animals which have them or directly from plants. But ultimately, those neurotransmitter chemicals come from plants. So in a sense, we're made of the compounds that mediate consciousness are plant products. I mean, we're made of these compounds, which, if we encounter them in the ecology, we'd identify them as drugs, and in fact, they are drugs.
Right.
We are made of drugs. So, we can just abandon the notion of the drug-free America because, organisms themselves are made out of drugs.
Right, and some which are really interesting, as a matter of fact, too. I mean, certainly the DMT, dimethyltryptamine compound, comes directly to mind, and we've spoken about it before, but it's in human metabolism. It exists within our system, and yet it's a Schedule 1 drug, at least classified that way.
But that's a political classification. It has nothing to do with its actual place in nature.
Right.
The example of DMT is interesting because it's interesting that it's, so widely distributed in nature, but on the one hand, that's, in a way it's not surprising. What's interesting to me about something like DMT is it's 2 steps from tryptophan, 2 trivial enzymatic steps. So in other words, tryptophan is one of these essential amino acids. It's one of the 20 amino acids that goes up to make a protein. So tryptophan is in all organisms. We haven't found one yet that doesn't have it, and if we did, it would be very unusual. By 2 very simple modifications, tryptophan can be converted to DMT in 2 steps. I don't know what that says about nature. Maybe nothing, but maybe it does. Maybe you can read into that fact something about the intelligence that's inherent in nature. I mean, is there a message here? I don't know.
Stephen, let me ask you a question about something that's a little more esoteric and not as scientific. I had this experience years ago when I was living in Colorado, and we had this vine that grew on our deck, and it had these big leaves, and in the morning when the sun came up, the leaves would look toward the sun, and then as the sun moved, it did this all day, and it turned out I learned about it. It's called heliotropism, they call it.
Right.
And it's this turning toward the sun. But I was, I didn't know anything about any of this stuff back then, but my initial intuition was that plant knows where the sun is. It's obvious. There was an intelligence of sorts there.
Oh, it's not of sorts. They're an extremely keen intelligence in plants. And, some of the things, Goethe would say stuff. It's like we discover so much only because we've forgotten so much, And I look back in like Jagatis Bose's research from the early 1900s, late 1800s, and in his examination of the nervous system of plants, he found that plant nervous systems are in some instances as sophisticated and rapid as ours, and in many instances approach ours. And so, to me, he found ways to measure that and look at it, and that plants have a lot more movement than they're credited with having, and a lot more sophisticated nervous response. It's just it's not in a form that we're used to seeing. And so, of course, it makes perfect sense to me that they make neurotransmitters, not just for all of the other reasons neurotransmitters can be used for in the plant kingdom, but also for their particular nervous system functions. And then I start looking at, of course, these more entheogenic substances that are present in the plant kingdom and move throughout plant ecosystems at various rates. We tend to think of ourselves as so incredibly unique with our intelligence, our mobility, our cognition, but the older I get and the more I've removed myself from that kind of bias, the more I see that we're only a specific example of something that's been present there for a long time. So, it's taken me a long time and a lot of experience to get to the place where I perceive plants as equal kindred and of equal intelligence. They just do a different thing with it than we do.
Amazing.
Than people do.
Right.
Remarkable. Well, let me ask you guys both a question then that's sort of related. There's a question that came in from the listening audience, and they're asking about these ideas of entheogens, and certainly they're talking about the mushroom and perhaps some of these combinatory things that involve DMT, Dennis, or whatever. But there was an overwhelming thread that came through email that I received before I spoke with you, and it was sort of like this. How can the listening audience help to integrate these types of ideas of intelligence in nature, symbiosis, gnosis, entheogenic investigation, and how can we help to get people to accept that these ideas are more approachable and not this whole, this is your child on crack image?
Oh boy.
I guess maybe that's a question that we've been struggling with for 40 years, Dennis. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I think in this culture, it's difficult, because we are, for one thing, we're estranged from nature, and we're, most people don't live in a situation that they're exposed to nature, and we're sort of trapped within this culture of civilization in a way, and as a result, we experience nature at one step removed. I think and so when it comes to, in a sense, all of these conundrums about drugs and drug regulation and what should our relationship to it be, in a sense, these are all sort of meta aspects of the ongoing process of human-plant interactions or human interactions with plant secondary compounds. I mean our policies with respect to drug regulation, tobacco control, all of these things are an expression of human behavior in response to interactions with plant secondary compounds.
Right.
But it sort of diffuses out into the area of law, jurisprudence, all of these things. If you go to a more indigenous type society that sort of lacks these overstructures that come with civilization, you can see it in a much more raw form. In a lot of the societies in the Amazon, for example, even though those traditions are threatened, they still persist. And in indigenous villages, they don't have drug laws. They don't have this type of regulation. They have, the people and nature, and then the role of people like shamans becomes very important. What they have is wise people, who are the mediators of this relationship. I think we need more of that in our society, but I'm not sure how you implement that.
Hey, Stephen, this sort of makes me think about some of the work that you're doing on ego development and this sort of thing, because this is obviously a function of ego, some of the cultural phenomenon that we're in the middle of that Dennis describes as so difficult to get over.
Yeah, it's, I've been active as a lobbyist at various parts for many years, and so seeing it from that kind of perspective about herbal practice, our healing, looking at it as a psychotherapist, looking at it as an herbalist, looking at it as somebody who works with these different mind states. The thing I've been most curious about really my whole life, which has informed everything, has been, what are those states of mind that human beings routinely engaged in that allowed this kind of communication between nature, and not just the mental dynamics of it, but there was this flow of sharing of spirit between the human being and the rest of nature.
Right,
and
you've written about that.
to really do that kind of work, I've always been fascinated by experiential anthropology. Theoretical anthropology is ridiculous to me. So, and I love Thor Heyerdahl because they said, well, no, the Egyptians couldn't have sailed there. And he goes, let's find out.
Yeah, get in a boat and do it.
And so Joan Halifax, to me, was an experiential anthropologist. And there's many people like that. And I want to know, what is it like inside that world, and how does it shift my paradigms I was raised with? And so I'm constantly confronted with the American cultural paradigm, and then what happens when you move out of that, and the impacts it makes on the psychological self and the structure. And, and the subtleties of ego state expression become very paramount. One of the things I've noticed with the few indigenous peoples I've met in other cultures is that, and also from reading what people who met them hundreds of years ago said, is that they tend to have a kind of a childlike approach to seeing the world. And then you see that kind of concept in Christianity and several other places of being childlike. And so in starting to work with that, to see what happens when you begin to let go of the self-definition as a single-point ego and begin to have that kind of flexibility of structure. And having worked with schizophrenics over many, many years, to find out truly all human beings are multiple personalities. I mean, Goethe was really cool about that, in that he said that the abnormal, if you assume the abnormal is normal, then you start to understand what normal really is. And so a multiple personality, like in Psycho or the movie or something like that, is an extreme expression of a normal state. And everybody's had that experience of they go home to see their family and all of a sudden they're acting like they're 4 years old again, or they get in a certain situation and then they're feeling very two, or whatever. And so the thing that I see in our culture is that there's a tremendous terror in the overall cultural paradigm of moving out of that extremely contained definition of self as a single ego point of view, and that flexibility of personality, which is normal and inherent in human beings, of course, is extremely facilitated by entheogenic substances. And people that move farther away from that kind of paradigm become more fringe-like on the culture. So for me, I went through many years being very upset with our culture because of the repressions that are inherent in it, and finally, just because of my age, I guess, began to take a much longer-term perspective. You can't get rid of the human tendency for perception of multiple reality structures by putting a psychological sidewalk over it. Everything doesn't work. Like they put sidewalks down and dandelions still break through them.
That's
and so the capacity of the human being has to have expression, and it continues to have expression because it's there for a reason. So that's why I look at schizophrenia as an ecological expression, not a biochemical breakdown necessarily, or a disease process. It's it's more of a cultural, ecological expression to me. And so I like preaching to the choir, because there's more and more people that feel inside themselves that something isn't quite right, and that as we talk to those parts of people, those of us who know about these other ways of being, it encourages them to allow their full humanness to express itself, and that's where the real juice is for me.
Fascinating. What do you make of that, Dennis?
Well, he's covered a lot of territory, but I basically agree with what he's saying. I think there is, in Western culture, there is this dynamic tension always between sort of the impulses of the individual and the motivation toward direct experience, and direct experience that is not necessarily mediated through cultural filters like the entheogens, for example, or other types of mind states where, the verbal scaffolding, the verbal filters, and the cognitive filters that we usually apply, are temporarily disabled to allow direct experience of, this energy web, this chemical web, all of the energetic influences that, tie us to the world. The idea that, the West is very invested in the notion that, the self and nature are separate.
The ultimate Woody Allen comment, nature and I are two.
But that somehow the skin is a barrier, that somehow it defines the boundaries between the self and nature, but that's an illusion. We are semi-permeable membranes, and there are things moving out and things moving in all the time. We're immersed in this chemical ecology, and responding to it and inputting into it all of the time. This is what Stephen so beautifully illustrates with the plants, but it's true of any organism that this is going on. And, recognition of this is somehow threatening, I don't know, this perspective is somehow threatening to Western power structures, which are much more invested in the notion of control. And, people going out and having these spontaneous experiences, it doesn't subserve the control corporate agenda very well,
No,
because
doesn't.
they may not be content to go back to their cubicle after things like that, And so I think, in a sense, the effort to control substances and humans' relationship to substances, and I deliberately make that a very sort of broad topic that's not just about drugs. It's about nutrients, it's about herbal medicines, it's, the whole issue of, who should own nature, who should patent these plant substances. It's really a expression of the sort of the paranoia of the Western worldview that nature is something to be controlled, and people's relationships with nature should be regulated and controlled. And if they're not, it's very dangerous. It's perceived as dangerous by the power structure because people may have thoughts that are, that are inherently dangerous, and actually they're right.
They're right. They do.
That's the thing. Right. They have it right.
Right. They understand what it means to their particular endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of have wondered too about this. That whole kind of approach. It seems to me, in looking back at it historically, that it really emerged from, in part, and I think fairly strongly, from the kind of unique dynamics that were going on between early Christianity and Roman pagan approaches, and that, the Christians were very oppressed, and any group that is oppressed like that when they kind of get on top, they tend to oppress others that they viewed as their oppressors. And so that kind of movement away from nature as a living force that was more clear in Roman and Greek tradition, and moving way away from that to that there's nothing in nature, and if you start looking at how the whole scientific paradigm began to emerge out of Christianity itself, and they were kind of curtailed in what they could say and how they could say it to get along with Christian perspectives. And Christianity's really influenced scientific work a lot more than I think most people realize. And we kind of get to this place where, there's no living intelligence or soul in nature, and that actually reconnecting with that thing is considered very dangerous, as Dennis was saying. And so I tend to look at it as not so much just civilization, but this particular kind of heavily Christian-influenced civilization structure that we have, that there's a lot of sense to it, and that there's some things in it from that. And so, it is dangerous to that perspective, very much so.
Well,
yeah, I think that's interesting that you should bring that up, because definitely sort of the Christian perspective has definitely very much influenced the evolution of Western civilization. And what's interesting about the influence that Christianity has had, it's essentially devalues nature, and it devalues or even actively suppresses biology. It's sort of based on the notion that, nature is, part of this world, and the Christian focus is always on the next world. So nothing in this world has, intrinsic value. So, you can get, on the further fringes of Christianity, for example, that perspective leads to some of the revelation, some of the left behind perspective that, the world's going to go down the tubes, and won't we be happy when that happens? Because we'll all be saved, and all the bad people will get their just desserts. But, it doesn't create a motivation to respect nature, and nature becomes something to be, in a sense, feared, because it's sort of the ultimate expression of this world, and in another sense, actively suppressed or opposed. This phenomenon of sort of what I've sometimes called, or what I sometimes think of as biological totalitarianism. What are the three things that Christians fear most? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? Isn't that what it is?
It is, in a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell. And what are the three things that are the expression of biology in all of its flowering the most? Sex, obviously. That's how we got here.
Right.
Drugs, if you go back to the notion that we were talking about a while ago, that, we are drugs. Essentially, organisms are bags of enzymes, neurotransmitters, proteins, hormones, all this stuff. They're drugs, right?
I love it.
And rock and roll, what is rock and roll if not rhythm? And isn't rhythm what characterizes the living state? I mean, in other words, we're not simply bags of these different biochemicals. The bags of biochemicals are very elegantly orchestrated in space and time, so that everything happens according to a rhythm. And in terms of, the basic human impulse to expression, it's rhythm. Rhythm is what gets you going, right? Rhythm is what gets your feet tapping or gets you up dancing, that sort of thing. It's biology. Right. It's biology that these sort of, that this sort of authoritarian version of Christianity most fears.
Right. And Dennis, certainly the rhythm idea is really taken to the place where you can see it in the indigenous drumming ceremonies and this sort of thing.
Well, they're sort of the opposite of this. I mean, they celebrate all of these things. They're pretty loose on the sexual side of it, and in constant relationship with their natural environment, the plants that surround them. Right. I mean, it's just a constant thing with them, and the rhythm as well. So what does that say? I mean, Christianity likes to posit itself as the culture of life, but it looks to me like it's more like the culture of death, in a sense, that it tends to, its agenda is to deny biology.
Remarkable. All right, Stephen, Dennis, that's a good place to take a break here, so let's do that. We'll come back in just a minute and talk some more. All right, this is Mike. You're listening to RadiOrbit. My guests are Stephen Herod Buhner and Dr. Dennis McKenna. You can find information about Stephen at www.gaianstudies.org. That's GAIAN studies.org. And you can also find out information about Dennis at www.hefter, HEFFTER.org, hefter.org. And with both Stephen and Dennis, just put either of their names in a search engine, and you'll find much information as well. All right, this is Mike. You're listening to RadiOrbit. Back in just a few minutes with Stephen and Dennis. And right now, a little more music from the Spheres.
We call these substances consciousness-expanding agents. Well, now, if consciousness does not play a major part in the future history of our species, then what kind of a future history are we talking about? Are we going to become stupider, duller, more animal-like? I don't think so. consciousness is our defining quality, and it must be nourished, encouraged, catalyzed, never more so than now, because we have a planet in peril. Adventure has fled. It's all humdrum. I just know, that they have forgotten the 5 grams of psilocybin sitting in their refrigerator.
Everybody, this is Mike. You're listening to RadiOrbit. We'll get back to that interview with Dennis and Stephen Herod Buhner in just a moment. I've got a couple things I'd like to mention here real fast, okay? First of all, Dennis mentioned early in the interview that he was awaiting the delivery of his plant samples from Peru, and they did arrive safely. He received them just a few days ago, as a matter of fact. So anyone who's wondering, that's the update. Everything's cool. Dennis got the plants, and the work continues. The website's www.gaianstudies.org for Stephen, www.hefter.org for Dennis. As soon as we go back to the interview, the first person who calls me, I'll give you a copy of the CD that you've been hearing tracks from tonight called Journey Through the Spheres. It's a tribute to Terence McKenna, and we're talking with Terence's brother Dennis tonight. And so call me at 573-874-5676 when we get back to that interview, and you can get a copy of that, all right? And I'll give you a copy of the program, too, if you want. Let's see, one last thing here. Anybody out there who is into astrology or planetary alignments or this sort of thing, I'm interested in what was happening last night. Special alignments, anything particularly special that was happening in the sky last night about midnight Central Time. So that would be midnight on the 2nd of April. Just rolling over to the 3rd of April. All right, so about 24 hours ago, 25 hours ago, as a matter of fact, from now. If there was anything special going on last night in the sky, I'd like to know about it if anybody has that sort of knowledge or information. Okay, one last thing here. I'm going to read a poem that Stephen wrote because I think it's appropriate, and he's a wonderful poet as well. And I want to try to introduce more people to Stephen Herod Buhner, because he comes from a wonderful tradition, and he's an amazing guy who's doing outrageously cool work. And he has a lot of different gifts. And this is one gift that he's given to us. This is called Flowers by Stephen Herod Buhner. Semen is Latin for a dormant fertilized plant ovum, a seed. Men's ejaculate is chemically more akin to plant pollen. See, it is really more accurate to call it mammal pollen. To call it semen is to thrust an insanity deep inside our culture, that men plow women and plant their seed, when in fact what they are doing is pollinating flowers. Now, doesn't that change everything between us? Let me ask you guys both another question that sort of is related to this whole cultural idea. Dennis, there was a word that I learned from your brother years ago. It's a word that's used in biology, and it's called neoteny. Neoteny, yeah. And neoteny means the retention of adolescent characteristics into adulthood. And I just thought that was such a fascinating description and word, because it seems to me to be a reasonably good definition of the state of many human beings, certainly many human males in our culture. Maybe thought you guys could give your ideas on this idea that we're pretty much adult boys or something like that.
Well, I think that notion of neoteny, as Terence used it, actually it wasn't his idea. It was, I think it was Gregory Bateson who came up with this idea. The notion is that evolutionarily, we have a prolonged childhood, right, in the sense that, we're born essentially in a larval state, and evolutionarily we have to be, because the head has got to be able to, emerge from the womb. So most of the brain development that goes on is postnatal, and it's very prolonged. I mean, they now pretty much know that the human brain doesn't really reach maturity until about age 30. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of things going on up until that. And because we have to, there is so much involved with the maturing of the brain and this sort of overlay of civilization, you have to acquire these cognitive structures, language, ability to write, all of these things. It takes time. And so, in a way, it's an evolutionary both advantage and disadvantage for a newborn, because the newborn is helpless, right? Without the parents, it wouldn't survive. On the other hand, with the protection of the parents, it has the luxury of, being able to go through this process of essentially brain evolution that goes on throughout childhood and young adulthood. It doesn't have to get up on its feet and be ready to run immediately.
Right.
Like other animals do. So in that sense, neoteny, I think, is a thing. As far as the population, as a race, we are sort of neotenous, or immature, certainly.
Right.
And I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, sort of culture as a neotenizing effect, almost.
Right.
I guess the next question or related to that, which maybe, Stephen, you could jump in on, is male initiation. I've always thought that was a fundamental thing that seems to be missing culturally in the West, is some sort of an initiatory experience for men to bring them out of boyhood and into the tribe, so to speak.
Well, it's like my thinking's been changing a lot on these particular issues that you're bringing up in the last few years considerably. And, I worked for years as a carpenter remodeling mansions and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
And, when I first went to work, how old was I? I was like 23. I tried to avoid work as long as possible, and finally it caught up with me. I had to learn the trade. And so I started working with these guys, and these old boys, they knew that I was as green as grass. And so they began this process of initiation with me. And there's an instinctive thing I've seen amongst men who work together. there's this kind of thing that happens. They work together in silence, but there's this energy that flows between their bodies that they all know about, but they never talk about it. And if any male comes into that circle who doesn't understand what it is to be male in that kind of a circumstance, they have a biologically driven, it seems, need to initiate that male into the group. And so I think amongst tradesmen, people that work with their hands, I see that initiation across disciplines, whether it's electricians or carpenters or whatever. Where I tend to not see it very much is amongst more white-collar people. And as a matter of fact, the way the jobs tend to be structured, they're structured in such a way that the initiation process just doesn't occur. And I see a lot of great sadness in those men because of it. And then there is that tendency for the American culture to be fairly youth-oriented, very adolescent, which as soon as I started moving into middle age, the first time, because guys, we learn to say with our eyes when we see a woman that's, attractive, and we say it with our eyes, oh, you're attractive, and the woman will say back, oh, thank you, and you're attractive too, and we're not going to do anything with it. It's just this very minor social flirting.
Right.
But when I moved into middle age and I saw a woman and I did that, and what her eyes said back was, you're old enough to be my father. And that's the moment I became middle-aged, right? And then all of a sudden
maturity dawns.
I started seeing there's this other state of being that we move into, that middle age is truly an archetype of its own, that has its own kind of identity and quality and perceptions and character to it that we're biologically intended to move into. And Bly used to say things like, he said, you can't understand what I'm talking about until you're at least 40. It really pissed me off. I go, hey, wait a second, But then now I go, well, yeah, he was actually right. And I think that's part of the reason why. And so as I've gotten older and I start to have less of a black and white kind of a view of things, I start to see how people are, not only the big broad brush thing, but there's a lot of variations. And there are a lot of men that go through initiatory processes. It's just we're not used to thinking of them as such. And because the men don't talk about it very much, most people aren't aware of it. And, of course, those kind of trades are of less and less importance each year as we go more into a kind of an information society. So, yeah, I feel like I was initiated, but how many men percentage-wise are, I don't know anymore.
Dennis, what do you think about an initiation, and maybe both of you, what do you think about an initiation with regard to entheogenic plants? I mean, do you think that that's something that should be on the table for both men and women as sort of an initiatory experience?
Well, yes, obviously. That's one of the forms of initiation that you find, in indigenous cultures, and that also usually goes along with the figure of a wise man or woman, someone, that holds the gnosis, that can sort of be the figure that can help, guide the initiation. In indigenous cultures, you have fewer options in a sense. I mean, the cultures tend to be small. There are, more, there are only so many options for initiation, in an indigenous culture, I guess. In our culture, you have so many more options on so many other levels. Some of these activities, like extreme sports or like, hunting, like the kinds of things, as Stephen says, you might experience in the company of other men, although women also, have initiatory, contexts and experiences, but we don't think of them formally. We don't have that clarity, I guess, to realize that these are really forms of initiation. I mean, when it's going on, Stephen makes the point that, he worked with carpenters, and it was only later that he realized that he had undergone this initiation. So it was not a formal thing. It wasn't that they said, now we're going to initiate you.
Right.
It's just something that took place as a result of hanging out and working with these people. I think that dynamic goes on in our culture a lot. I think basically it is a good thing. I think that people are reaching out. People are reaching out for essentially a form of spiritual expression that has meaning for them. And for young people particularly, when they're on the cusp of adulthood, they want a meaningful experience, and they may not consciously even, in most cases they probably don't say, I really need an initiation.
Right.
They don't think that clearly about it. It's just that they feel that something is lacking. They reach out for an experience. And so, those that are lucky, find either a wise mentor or a situation. Maybe they go to South America to, try ayahuasca and that sort of thing. Others don't really have that option, and so they seek other forms of initiation. Whatever you have to do to become a member of the gang or whatever.
Right.
These are forms of initiation.
Yeah, we have there's certainly gang-related rites of initiation.
And
these are tribal institutions, basically.
Amazing.
We're a tribal species. Nothing's ever going to change.
Yeah.
An interesting comment for sure. Yeah.
And the thing about, entheogens, it's been my belief and experience with myself anyway for a very long time that those kind of teenage years, there's a tremendous drive in human beings for some sort of a visionary experience that, as Dennis was putting it, that will sort of set the tone for the direction for their lives. And I think there's a tremendous hunger for that. And to me, psychotropic substances, they belong in that category. I mean, that's was one of the major influences for me back in the 60s. And it really helped set the structure and tone and direction for my life and all of my subsequent research. And, I've known a lot of people that did LSD back in the 60s, lots of them. And, not that many of them that I know really had significant visionary experiences. For a lot of people, it was like, drinking, but more fun,
Right,
and a lot of laughter, and it was great. And so...
No real intent. I mean, I think with psychotropics like entheogens, context is everything. Leary and Metzner and people like that said it, and they got it basically right when they said it's all about set and setting.
And intention, too.
And, intention, is part of set. It's part of what you bring to it. In other words, your experiences, what you know, and your intention and what you anticipate it's going to be about. I mean, it's perfectly possible to pop LSD and go to parties or, and basically do it in a way that's purely recreational and not associated with any intent or any desire to have insights or uncover anything. I don't say that's even illegitimate necessarily. I mean, that's, recreation has its place, but, I think that it's also possible to use it in a very different context where there is an intent and there is sort of an expectation that you're going to learn something, you're going to discover something about yourself, perhaps. Our culture, in indigenous cultures, this is pretty much the context in which these substances are approached. In our culture, that isn't even permitted. I mean, that is part of the answer to the so-called drug problem, with young people. I think if you could create contexts in which people could have these experiences, many would have them and they would benefit from them, and it would be, a much less of a problem than it is now. But our culture doesn't even admit, of the value of this type.
Well, we don't have any really living mystical tradition within the body of our culture.
Right, exactly.
And that's a real problem.
The mystical traditions, even in Christianity, have been suppressed.
Very much so. And, that's a natural expression of the human being, and everybody benefits from it to a certain extent. And so, but people that have that kind of movement inside them toward that direction, they have very few cultural expressions or cultural outlets that they can find that will allow that dynamic to emerge.
Right. Even, and again, this goes back to this notion of control. Yeah. I mean, a lot of what ecclesiastical, hierarchical, religious institutions are about are control. And, they're basically authoritarian institutions, and they frown on people having their own experiences. That's not politically correct. That's outside the bounds of, what should be permitted. The experience needs to be, received by the priest and interpreted and massaged and filtered and then trickled down to the masses. We can't have people going off and having these, spontaneous experiences on their own. That's very threatening. And they're right. Again, they're right. These are threatening to the institutions.
Right. All right, let's let me switch gears here real fast for a moment, and I want to talk about something that gets back to this idea of intelligence in nature. And Dennis and Stephen, you both mentioned that there seems to be a tendency in education, for example, of students to gravitate towards things like zoology rather than botany, and even energetics. I think of things like engineering and the sciences and this sort of thing. And I was reading an article just a couple days ago about this giant what they call the Large Hadron Collider. It's a big, giant super collider, particle accelerator type thing. And there was a comment that I recalled from years ago that Dennis made, and I'm paraphrasing, Dennis, but you made a comment about this idea that science looks toward these huge, high energetic experiments to try to solve the ultimate questions of nature and the universe and all this thing. But in nature, however, some of the most interesting processes occur at really low energy levels. And it seems that maybe all of this scientific, their quest for the ultimate particle and all this sort of thing, maybe just chasing ghosts, it seems like, because of these other ideas that are at much lower energy levels.
Well, I'm all for, high energy experiments. I think it's great, that we have the technology that we can look at these processes. I think that, in a sense, it's, it's the ultimate expression of the arrogance of science in a way, to be able to say we can do these things. We can initiate these processes where literally we can tear space and time apart. And it's a sort of an expression of the arrogance of science that not only can we do this, but we will do it no matter what. I have read certain experiments that they've designed that say, well, there's a, not zero probability that we may collapse space-time.
Right, create a black hole.
But we're going to do it. We're going to do it anyway, because we are scientists, and that's what we do. But so I think it's good in a way that we, it's an expression of human creativity, and we can learn things about it. But to address your question, I think by far the more interesting processes are going on at much lower energy levels. It's not so much about, scale and energy levels. Mm-hmm. It's what's going on, at the synapse, for example, or in the brain, these sorts of things, especially in biological processes, which are, low energy, low temperature processes. They all take place, well below the boiling point of water. They take place in aqueous mediums, and from the biochemical energetics point of view, they're fairly boring, but from the point of view of the intricacy of the processes, what is really going on, that's really where the rubber meets the road. That's where the action is. Quantum processes, for example, in the operation of the brain, we know that they take place. Things like electron tunneling, superconductivity, and this kind of stuff. I mean, when we wrote The Invisible Landscape, this was all wild speculation. Right. And now it's pretty much, everybody knows this is going on, So I don't know what the answer is. I think we have to look at it at all levels. But I think that, it's not going to be found by the Hadron Super Collider. It's going to be found in somebody's test tube.
All right. Well, the purpose for my question was really for people who are listening to get a feel for the fact that there are other things that are out there that are very interesting that may not have the flash, no pun intended, of the Large Hadron Colliders, but there are very interesting things happening in botany and in at the microscopic levels as well. So.
Absolutely, and I think I think that will come around. I mean, I think that as we begin to focus on these extremely small scale phenomena, which come up in the area of nanotechnology and this kind of thing. These are now getting a lot of attention, and they are very sexy. But what they do is, they refocus attention from sort of the macro or the meta macro to the extremely small scales. Extremely small scale processes. And at some point, these things come together. I mean, what happens on the quantum scale that you can measure, radii of the order of the atom and that sort of thing, also influence macrocosmic processes, but they're much harder to observe that way. So I think you're going to see a refocusing on the extremely small. I once wanted to start a nanotechnology company, which I would call IBM, which would stand for Itty Bitty Machines.
I love it. That's wonderful. I remember an old transcript of a shamanic journey that I heard years ago that was documented by Joseph Campbell, as a matter of fact. And he said, as the shaman was going into trance, when he came out of it, he spoke and he said, "When you go into God's place, you make yourself small." And I was always struck by that from a number of different levels, but I just thought it was great. So, Stephen, if I could, I want to ask a little bit about Lyme disease.
Oh, that's the one of the emerging diseases that I've been interested in for a long time. It's a really intriguing disease, and I think there's nothing sexier than a good emerging disease like that. And,
we got plenty of those these days, it seems.
Yeah, plenty of those, and people consistently forget one primary fact, that human beings are designed to be biodegradable. And we're trying to escape that destiny. So, these kind of large-scale disease patterns that move through systems are really intriguing to me, because it kind of brings us back down to our inescapable destiny. But the other thing that's fascinating to me, too, are the plant populations that move with them. And, for instance, Lyme disease, as it's been moving up to in the East Coast and in that pattern kind of through there, the one primary plant that's been accompanying it, there's several, but one of them that is really intriguing is Japanese knotweed, which is considered to be an invasive botanical and should be exterminated, But what's fascinating when you look at what Japanese knotweed does when it goes into the system of a human being that takes it, it actually shuts down every inflammatory pathway that the Lyme disease spirochete initiates. Really? And I mean, it's like very sophisticated. I must have found 30 points of meeting where it specifically deactivated the spirochete's impacts on the human body. And, this is kind of a thing that herbalists have known for a long time, which is that if they start to treat somebody, or if they get ill, or a friend gets ill, that the plant that they need to treat it will spontaneously start growing either in their yard or around there. And this phenomenon has been reported on for, hundreds and hundreds of years by herbalists. And so I love seeing that kind of dynamic, and it's, one of the things I talked about in Lost Language of Plants, too, how these plant populations tend to move in response to needs that they pick up of the other ecosystem members. And anyway, so Lyme disease just happens to be one of the newest ones that I'm looking at because it's such a kind of a freaky, interesting disease.
Oh, it's fascinating.
That's very interesting. So, Stephen, what is your perspective on bird flu?
On bird flu, it's just like, it's like Robert Heinlein summed it up best years ago. He said human population problems have a horrible way of solving themselves.
So is that what you think inevitably there'll be this mutation in the flu virus, then it'll then allow human-to-human transmission? Is that?
Well, it's inevitable that something like that's going to emerge. I mean, flu is one of the best candidates for it because, well, for a zillion reasons. If anybody's been reading the paper, the experts kind of go over the reasons for it being a much more important disease than malaria or something like that, for instance, because of its person-to-person transfer, and it just can spread around the world pretty quickly. And but the thing is,
once it crosses that threshold, but so far it hasn't done so.
No, well, it has. It's kind of playing around the edges of it, and there's maybe 15 diseases that are all kind of becoming sort of candidates for emerging like that, and I mean, part of the problem is that is environmental. We've already exceeded the carrying capacity of the Earth, and you can't. There's a point of no return that we're hitting. So, for instance, like one of the major things about peak oil, which is kind of the herb of the day topic these days, is what most people aren't looking at is what that's going to do to the healthcare system, because almost all the pharmaceuticals we have are made from oil. Right. So we've basically erected a barrier around the human species using technological medicine, and each year we have to put more and more energy into the technological medicine we use to keep that barrier in place. And sooner or later, it's just the way ecosystems work. Sooner or later, we're not going to be able to have the energy. We just aren't going to be able to do it to keep that barrier in place. And when it goes down, the gyrations that are going to occur from disease influx from this kind of temporary period that we've created since 1946, before the system equalizes, there's just going to be a lot of devastation. And that's, just because we have an opposable thumb and can print books doesn't mean we're immune from, these kind of systematic processes. And so,
and when that happens, probably cultures that, indigenous cultures that do have a reliance on plant medicines, they'll probably do all right.
They'll do a lot better. But, one of the things that are really interesting to me is that over the last 40 years, there's somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 herbalists that have trained in the United States. And see, I speak at a lot of conferences, and for years I'd ask this question, I'd say, well, why did you all decide to train to be an herbalist? I mean, it's a profession you can't legally practice.
Right.
And yet all these classes are filled, and the 90% of the people would say something like, I don't know, I just felt like I had to.
Wow.
And to me, that's an ecological expression, of the human species knowing there's this skill they're going to need before too long.
Right. So in a sense, this is a collective expression of the anticipation of this crisis. When,
yeah, I think so. And
people will turn to their local herbalists.
Right. And 90% of them are women disguised as housewives in suburbia. And then all of a sudden, at that point of need, that knowledge base is going to still be there.
Very interesting.
Ultimately, that's a good thing, but there will be a huge wrench.
A huge wrench. Of course, when the disease comes in like that, they've run simulations of this, and it always is the same because of how the system is set up, is that the the first people that die are the EMTs, the ambulance drivers, the nurses, and the doctors, right? And then because that's the people where they concentrate the disease, and that's just it. It shuts down the whole system after that.
Yeah. As well, I mean, another worry I have about those things, I inevitably I think that these mutations, will take place, and how virulent they are and how quickly they spread remains to be determined. But in the meantime, all of this concern about it does serve the totalitarian control agenda very well.
No, that's true. There's nothing like fear to keep that stuff going.
Yeah, I mean, you can get away with a lot in terms of quarantining people, moving large segments of populations to places they don't necessarily want to be. People will tolerate that if they think, it's an epidemic. Right? We have to do this for public health reasons. They'll put up with a lot more than if, it's being done for some political agenda.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And Dennis, you guys, that's one of the reasons why I'm glad we got Stephen's opinion, because I've always had this little skeptical thing in the back of my mind that says, I wonder, how serious these pandemic quote-unquote things are, or are they just being used as another manipulatory device, as a control mechanism?
I think the answer is both.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, we haven't spoken much about mutations, but this idea that there are all these hidden herbalists and things like that, and people that are learning to understand these things, it seems to me almost like an intelligence test. And you have to be able to pass go, otherwise you don't make it to the next phase of the game or something. And then I begin to think again about the endogenous tryptamines, and if they play a role in some future advancement of the species or something like that.
Well,
and I know that's a question that's unanswerable maybe, but I know you've thought a lot about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they do and they don't. I think. I mean, I don't know if you read my essay about ayahuasca and human destiny.
I did.
I didn't pick the title, by the way, but I mean, what I expressed there, I used to be sort of all gung-ho about the notion that ayahuasca could be used to treat alcoholism or drug addiction. We should develop a standardized extract. We should do clinical trials, et cetera, and basically we should develop it into, a pharmaceutical or a quasi-pharmaceutical. And I've sort of gotten away from that notion in the last few years, partly because I have come up against the regulatory wall, and it's just impossible to breach in this country. It's hard enough to get an IND approved for a common herbal medicine like St. John's wort or kava kava or something like that. They never anticipated that you were going to be wanting to do clinical trials with, plants that contain controlled substances. I mean, this just wasn't on their radar, But in a sense, I've stepped back from it, and I've come to think that, maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe, with respect to these plants, and ayahuasca is a good example, and it sort of touches on this notion of plant intelligence that we've been talking about. Maybe ayahuasca doesn't really need, people like me to come along and make pharmaceuticals out of it. Maybe it has its own way of finding the right people.